6. My name is Sue Paul, and I'm at the Warhawk Air Museum in Nampa, Idaho. I'm conducting a Veterans History Project interview in conjunction with the Library of Congress. Today I will be interviewing Mr. Stephen Allison. Welcome to the Warhawk Air Museum, sir. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
In addition to myself and Mr. Allison, in the room are Mr. Jerry Birch, who is training Mr. Don Reynolds to perform with the camera. Sir, could you please tell us the year that you were born and where you were born?
Well, I was born in 5/15/20 and in Artesia in Southern California.
And could you tell us your current address?
Well, current address is Enterprise, Oregon. It's 82310 Ruby Peak Lane, Enterprise.
And could you tell us, sir, which war you served in and what division of the military you served in?
Well, I served in the Army Air Force in World War II and in the Air Transport Command.
Thank you very much, sir. Steve, you were born in Artesia, California in 1920. Did you grow up in Artesia?
No, my folks moved about 60 miles north to what was a little town called Oxnard, right on the coast. It was a farming community, and I spent my whole childhood and grammar school and high school years right there, and most enjoyable childhood and all the rest.
What did your father do for a living?
Well, he had a ranch and farmed, and we had a few cattle and other crops that grew.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I have one brother is all. Yeah.
And so you grew up working on the farm and the ranch. It was a farm or ranch?
Yep.
And what did you like doing, like in high school? What was your interest?
I was a gun nut. I thoroughly enjoyed guns. My dad started me with a rifle, a .22, when I was 6, and there was no one else around, so I was able to go hunting all by myself after school and the like until I was, I guess up about 15 or so. They were getting old enough, and some other buddies and the like. But I did lots of hunting, and my dad took me hunting, and I had other older friends that took me under their wings, and I had a good childhood and happy time.
Did you have much effect in Oxnard with the Depression during that time?
Well, we were real fortunate. My folks, let's say, we grew a lot of things and had a lot of our own produce and milk and this and that and beef and all, and fortunately a very nice home, and we're able to get by. Times were tough. The dollar was worth about 99.5 cents that time, but we got by quite well.
So when you graduated from high school, it was about 1937 then.
38.
38 when you graduated from high school. Was there any sense of a World War problem coming on that you knew about at that age?
Oh, there was rumbles in the latter years of high school, I guess, a bit, about Japan, or this or that, what Japan was doing. And then, of course, all you had was the newspapers and the radio. And, of course, the only time I ever listened to the radio was when I came back at night and suffered through it, probably, And 39 was coming along, and Hitler's doing this and that, and 40 is things are not looking any better, and 41 early, why, the Battle of Britain, and what's going on in Europe, So the handwriting's on the wall, really. It's being talked about, and in 41, by let's say the middle of the year there, why the draft was coming on, and you had.
What were you doing then?
At that time, I was still there at the ranch. And but the draft was coming on, and you could enlist, and if you enlisted, you could enlist in the service of, we'll say, Navy or Marines or Army, or if you waited till the draft, why Uncle Sam says we do need you, yes, and you are going there.
Now you were 20 years old.
I was. In 21, I'm 21. Mm-hmm. I mean, at 41, I'm 21,
Right.
And. So,
were you married or
no?
Hadn't settled down?
No. Let's put it this way: to hurry it up and hurry. from all through the years, I was free white 21 and not married, and I had no ambitions of being married during the service due to the fact that I had friends who were married, and unfortunately they didn't survive, and a couple of families were kind of shook up, you know. So it was much simpler just to be on your own and selfish-wise and not have to worry about somebody else.
So in 1940, then you were looking at being drafted, and
Well,
you
41. No, I went
that.
41. Why? The middle there, the fall semester. Why? I went to Cal Poly, which is an ag college at San Luis Obispo on the coast, and all I wanted to do from the year one about was have a cattle ranch. That's all my ambition was: horses and cattle. I could have cared less about airplanes. There was a primary field about 2 miles from our ranch. It was where they had Stearmans. And they were flying day around, you know, and they used part of the ranch as a downwind leg and the like. And after you'd watched them for months, why, you wouldn't even look up at them and the like. And I had absolutely no desire about flying. Never been in one. It wasn't a case of, are you afraid to go up or like. It was just, I had no desire. All I wanted to do was horses and cattle, one-track mind. So I went to ag college and only lasted there several months, and the wars, you know, it's coming up to October, and then it's coming up November, and Uncle Sam says, well, I think we really need you boys and the like. So several of us, we left college and went and enlisted. And on December the 17th of 1941, 10 days after December the 7th, of which I still really remember, but on December the 17th, why, we'd taken the train from Oxnard and went to Fort MacArthur, big military induction center, and about 10 o'clock the 17th night, why, your hand raised up and all you say, and yes, I are one. I am in the Army Air Force now as a private.
Why did you pick the Army Air Force?
Well, I had a selfish motive. I know what a Springfield rifle weighs and what a backpack weighs, and I said, well, now, you know, I really think I'd rather go into the Air Force, into armament, and become an armor, which in the armament part of it was taking care of machine guns and bombs and what, and the aircraft, you know. And since I like guns, why, I said, well, I think I'd rather do that as to be a foot soldier and sleeping here on the ground, you know, and all of those. So I had a selfish motive, you know, which worked out quite well, fortunately.
I'm going to backtrack. I would like to know where you were on December 7th, 1941. Tell us about that day.
Well, I had gone over about 10 o'clock in the morning to a boyfriend's, his folks' ranch, and it was Sunday morning, I believe, and I arrived there about 10 o'clock, and they were all excited about what had happened, this and that, and they told me about, you know, Pearl Harbor and all the rest, and of course I'm, you know, oh boy, you know, can't believe it and all the rest. So that was first inkling of what had transpired. And
how long was it, if you recall, before the news of the deaths at Pearl Harbor really came back to the U.S., where people on the mainland, where you really heard the damage, the severe damage that was done there?
Well, I can't recall that. All I can recall is just December the 7th, and then from then on, why, the gears were really starting to turn as to where I was going to turn and go.
Well,
so like I say, 10 days later, why, several of us had enlisted, and four of us.
What about your brother? What did your brother do?
Well, my brother, he was older than I, and he was up in a bank deal in Bakersfield, like, and then later in the war, why, he moved down to Long Beach. My folks owned property right in town there, and he was there, and his family, he was married, had a child and all, and he worked in the shipyards there.
And so you decided to join the Army Air Corps with your buddies, and where were you stationed? What did they do with you
well,
then?
There was four of us went together. We all became pilots. The other three wanted to become pilots, and I was just going along for the ride. I was going to be an armor and never dreamed of flying. And like I say, they all became pilots. Two of them were Army Air Force, and one was Naval. Unfortunately, all three were killed. Different things happened, but...
What was the first plane you flew?
Well, the first plane I flew was a PT-19.
Were you in Texas then?
Well, yes. After what happened was I went into in January, early January. There was hardly anything such as boot training or this or that, which they'd shipped us back to St. Louis, Missouri, and Jefferson Barracks on the Missouri, and for about 2 weeks, and explained to you have a left foot and a right foot, and halt and turn this and that, and a few more shots and what, and then we're on a train back to Fresno Hammer Field, and we were sent to an A-20 attack squadron. It was a Douglas A-20, a twin-engine attack bomber, really a real great aircraft, and it just had one pilot, and times two gunners alike. But it was a low altitude attack type of fighter bomber and like, so they sent me into went to armament, and to learn all about how to strip a machine gun and this and that and clean all the rest, you know. How I got to flying was, at that time, they needed aircraft gunners, you know, since there was a rear gunner and all, handling a couple of 30s. And everything's chaotic at that time, if you can imagine. They're trying to build new squadrons and this and that, you know. And so one of the incentives for aerial crewman, if you were on flight pay, you got half your base wages, you know, in addition, see. Well, at that time, since I was a private and making top money at $21 a month, and half my base pay is $10.50, I am going to be in the chips at $31.50 a month. How darn. So that's why I said, well, you know, maybe I ought to try that. And some of my buddies, they were saying, all you had to do was go up and fly in one of those and keep your cookies. And it says, well, that's not too bad. So the first ride in any aircraft that I ever had was in an A-20 attack bomber up over Yosemite National Park, if you can imagine, which is just opposite Fresno.
And what did you think about the ride?
Oh, this is a great world. Gosh, look down there. I can see the roads, railroad, and look at that. Oh, there, look at that huge lake. This is a whole different world up here. As he turns it up this or that, and you say, whoop, you know. And so anyhow, I came back down, and that was fine, and that was the start of that. Hoop-de-doo. I mean, I'm going to continue with this, you know.
So it was okay.
That was okay.
So
and I was just being a gunner. Now, I had a couple of friends that wanted to go into pilot cadet training, you know. But I'd never thought about it. But what happened was, one Sunday, there was going to be a 3-ship formation go up to just fly, formation flying up out of Oklahoma City there. And I was going to be one of the gunners, and there was 2 gunners, and 1 pilot and 2 gunners to each aircraft. And we were just doing, you know, formation flying. But it was stormy, and it wasn't until about 9 o'clock that clouds kind of broke up and this and that, and they said, okay, well, you can take off. We'll be able to go flying. So I walking out and just crawling up into the back end of in the gunner's compartment, this A-20, and engines were ticking over and the like, and one of my buddies came up and he pounds on my shoulder. He said, I got to take your place. And I said, oh, yeah, well, I got to get my flying time. You have to have 5 hours at least a month for flight pay. And I'd had mine, and he didn't have his, so he had to get, so, you go grumbling off. I wanted to go fly, but anyhow. So about 15 minutes later, after they'd taken off, one pilot called in. He said there's been a mid-air collision. 2 aircraft are going down. I only see 2 parachutes. And to hurry that up, 4 of my friends were killed. And, sorry, the boy who took my place, prop went right through him, or he chopped off the rear. What they did, it was a three-ship formation. The left craft was flying under, passing under to come up over on the right wing, you know, to fly a three-ship this way. And when he came back, we don't know what, but his prop just chopped off the tail, the back section of that one. And one pilot and one gunner was all that got out. So, and I stayed, I volunteered. I was a guard that night over that wreck a number of miles out of town there. It gave you a lot of time to think. So the outcome was, and one of my buddies was saying, well, why don't you apply for cadets and training, you know? And so I said, well, yeah, we just got to pass the exam, which is going to be a rough bit. And luckily I made the exam, passed it, and was able to go on to cadets. But that was the incentive of my starting to ever be a pilot. In my wildest dreams, I never dreamed of ever, you know, being a pilot. But so that was just the start of.
Because you wanted to fly yourself. Mm-hmm.
I thought if I was going to get my neck broke, maybe I might as well do it myself. So that was the start of it.
And so tell us about the pilot training. And once you switched to the pilot training, then what were you trained in? How did they train you to?
Well, you go to cadet centers, and about 3 months of all the basic and training to become an officer and all that, and a gentleman supposedly, and learn the basics of flight and weather, and they gave us courses in math and meteorology, and I think it was trigonometry, and I could hardly even spell that, let alone do it. But anyhow, I fortunately passed all those exams. I never studied so hard in all my life to get that done, you know. And so from that, then you go to primary. And that was up in Ballinger, Texas, which is north of San Angelo, about, like 50 miles. And we're flying PT-19s, low wings. And that started there, in November of 42, I believe it was. And so after about 8 or 9, between 8 and 10 hours, why most of us had soloed or were washed out, which did happen to some of them that couldn't. They made more controlled crash landings than they should have, and so they washed out a certain number there. And at that time, you did all the basics of flight, of the different types, you know, of landing, and then of course stalls and turns, power on, power off, this or that, you know.
What kind of airplanes were you flying?
There was just those PT-19s, and this is primary.
This is primary. Well,
you learn all the basics, you know, and even the first of the spins, you know, and they washed out. Oh, they washed out close to a half of the classes at that early time. They were really rough. And luckily, you really sweated it out. And luckily, I made it and went on to basic, which went back to the Army Air Force there out of San Angelo. And then at that time, we were flying BT-13s, Vultee. We called them Vultee vibrators. They made a tremendous noise, but they were a low wing. Had quite a bit of horsepower, and of course they were a huge aircraft from a primary, you know. And at that place, at that time it was all the Army airline pilots, instructors, and
did you intend at this point to be a fighter pilot? That's what you thought you were.
Well, you're working up to that in basic. You work up to whether you're going to be a hotshot fighter pilot, you hope, you know, or whether you're going to go on to multi-engine and twins and four-engine.
And when did you find out which you were going to be assigned to?
Well, in basic, you had a choice at that time, fortunately. And so I applied, you know, I wanted to go to pursuit school. And there was a number, it was kind of like I think probably 50% of the class kind of split, you know, as to whether they wanted to go on to multi-engine or single engine. So I went to single, and that was advanced down on Eagle Pass, Texas, right on the border. And we're flying AT-6s. And of course, it's a repetition of all the maneuvers, and then you start doing more. You get into formation flying, and you did a lot of night flying and all different types of maneuvers. We'd get up and the ladder pipe and dogfight amongst ourselves and play around, you know. And it was an enjoyable time.
So after you graduated then from that,
Let's say that was, things really changed at the graduation. At that time, I checked out in a P-36 Mohawk, which was a big radial. That was a start, you know, and was hoping on to go on to, you know, you could put down on your wish list, let's see, I want to be a P-51 pilot, I'd like to be a P-38 pilot, and that was kind of a wish list. Well, when my set of orders came out, this was in June of '43, why, about, I'd say 60 to 70% of the class, of my class, they'll all be going to come, we thought, pursuit pilots, you know. Well, about 60 to 70% all of a sudden were sent to multi-engine because the war in Europe, they were losing so many bombers a day, you know, like 60 and 70, 17s and 24s, and some of those rage, you know. Well, if you take 70 a day, that's the loss of 140 pilots. Two pilots to, you know, pilot and co-pilot, so that's a loss of 140 pilots, and they were losing lots of pilots, so they needed a lot more bomber crews. Well, then there was probably about 20% that they sent to pursuit and the like, and I don't know where that was, you know. And when my name, you know, being one of those, it's kind of in the Army, you know, we'd like to have some volunteers. All of you with names of A are volunteer, you know, to there. Okay. Well, my name being A, it looked like the orders came out that way, you know. And about, let's see, it was about 10 of us on that deal there. We read them, we said, oh no, Lord, how could this ever happen to us? And here I'm sent to the Air Transport Command to go to Delta Airlines in Atlanta, Georgia, to train with their airline captains on their cargo runs to fly C-47s. Now, how demeaning can that possibly be when you had planned on, you know, zipping through the skies in fighter aircraft, and here you're going to be a glorified passenger bus driver or a glorified truck driver, you know. Well, the thing of it was, we didn't have brains enough to realize at that time that that was the greatest thing that could have happened to you, to be able to fly with these old captains that had, you name it, hours and like. So we lived it up there in Atlanta, and more ground school and engines, you know, and then we went through instrument training, link and what, and then we learned to fly the C-47, you know, take it off and land it and all. And then we went on the cargo runs, which were all the way from Cincinnati, Oklahoma City, Brownsville, Miami, Florida, and so we flew around the clock as far as weather and instrument training, you know. So which was after we realized, well, this is the tough war, having to go to Miami, you know, and eat some lobster now and then, you know, and tomorrow we'll fly back up, you know. But anyhow, that bubble finally, it burst after about 4 months of that, and they sent us back to reality with the Army Air Force. And we checked out then and up in St. Joe, the air base there, with B-25s and C-47s.
and where did you think you were going to be assigned to at that point?
I had no idea. They just brought us back into the fold, so to speak, and we didn't know for sure whether, see, Long Beach was a big base, I mean, Air Transport Command, Dallas, Memphis, went up in Michigan, and the big one where we were in 7th and Great Falls. But after a short period of training there, why, they sent us to Great Falls, and then made a trip to the north and the like, and the next thing you know, why, they sent it, we were on orders to go to Palm Springs at the pursuit school.
This is your air transport patch
Yes,
that you wore on your jacket.
right.
That's good, that's good.
So in Palm Springs, you still didn't know that you were going to be assigned to the.
Oh, yes.
Okay. When did you find out that you were being assigned to the ferry
Well,
group?
when I arrived in Great Falls, they explained that that's where we were going to be based, and then we would go to the pursuit school to check out in all these different aircraft and the twins. And we went down there and we checked out in P-39s and P-40s, Republic P-47s, and the P-51s, A's and B's.
Did you know it was the 7th ferry group that you were that you were assigned to? Did
Yes.
you know what that meant? Did you know what it meant to ferry
yes,
the
they told
airplanes?
us
You
we
knew where you
were
gonna go?
we were destined to come back and fly on the Russian program
Okay.
and other places throughout the states. But the idea was, shortly after that training deal, we checked out in the A-20s, you know, the big twin, and of course we've been in the 25s and the like. But the idea was, no matter where we went, we could get out of one aircraft and into another and go.
You would be that well trained. In
Yes,
so many different aircraft.
yes, and then
How much time did they allow you in each aircraft to become familiar with it? I mean, was it?
Oh, at the pursuit school, I believe. I'm trying to think whether we had like 10 hours or so in each one. I think at least 10 hours in each one. But surprisingly, after you fly these different aircraft, you really didn't get to think much of getting out of one into the other. Basically, in airplanes, most all of them have somewhat similar characteristics and this and that. It was more the difference where certain switches were placed and things like that. Just becoming oriented with each aircraft's own little arrangements.
Steve, we're in the showroom of the Warhawk Air Museum, and we have some World War II fighter planes here, which of course you're pretty familiar with. So when you left Palm Springs and they sent you to fly, tell us what your experiences were after you left Palm Springs, the kinds of planes that you were ferrying at that point.
Well, when we left Palm Springs, they'd sent us to Long Beach to pick up a brand new P-51B.
Which is what we're looking at behind us.
And that
here.
was the A's, which we had, first ones I ever flew, and they were 51 A's. They had the Allison engine in them, whereas the B's had the Rolls Royce, right? And they were different. They basically, characteristics were pretty much the same, but there was a little difference, you know. But anyhow, I flew that 51B across the South to Atlanta and on up the East Coast to Newark, New Jersey, where they were putting on shipboard to go to England. Okay. And then from there we went over to Buffalo, New York, to Bell Aircraft's factory, and we got weathered in there for a while. But we went completely through the factory and the like. And when the weather broke, we had brand spanking new P-39s with Russian markings on them, and we were on our way back to Montana. And from there, they were going to be headed north.
Now, Great Falls is the air base. There was the headquarters.
The 7th ferrying group was based in Great Falls, and all the Russian aircraft went through Great Falls. They could have came from the factory in different areas in the United States, but they all came to Great Falls. And
why were we flying planes up to give to the Russians?
Well,
what was the reason
at that
for that?
time it was called a Lend-Lease program. And the United States was furnishing Allied forces and the Russians in a big way all types of military equipment. And the Russians received the largest amount of aircraft, I believe, of any of the Allied. England or some, France a few, you know. But
did you ever meet any of the Russian pilots?
Oh yeah, yes. We up in Fairbanks, they'd come across the Bering Sea and down to Fairbanks. And we ate together in the officers' mess there at Ladd Field in Fairbanks, and I became quite fluent in Russian, really, because I could say "niet" and "da," which in plain language was yes and no. and they were a little bit more fluent than most of them, but that was about as much conversation other than sign language that we one another had.
What were the flying conditions like from Great Falls up to Fairbanks or up to Alaska?
Yes, ma'am, they sure were. From good to bad and sometimes worse. Weather was our biggest problem.
Did you feel like you were well enough trained for what you came across?
Well, you trained, you had a living experience in some respects, but no, the training was fine. What we did, all the fighters had to fly at least 2 and usually 3 or 4 as a flight in case one had problems or went down or something else. You know, you could hopefully say, yeah, the last I saw him it was such and such, because it was nothing but timber, wilderness, so to speak, and huge mountains, you know, all that country there.
And did you fly, at that time you were only flying the fighters then?
Well, I was flying the fighters, and then every now and then, they'd give you a B-25.
And those you could fly alone?
No, the B-25, excuse me, yes, you're right. The B-25s, we could fly on our own. And we'd have a co-pilot, and just the 2 of you deliver the aircraft.
Because you had twin engines,
yeah,
that's
the
why?
A-20s, we could fly those on our own also. But the fighters, we always flew as a flight.
We're standing now next to a Curtiss P-40N model, and behind us is the E model. You flew these also, didn't you?
Right, we checked out of these.
Where did you fly these out of?
Well, we flew these out of Palm Springs at the fighter school. And I got along fine. As I recall, the P-40 was the one aircraft, though, that you didn't want to go to sleep on the landing. As a matter of fact, the only time that you should, let's say, relax a bit was when you taxied in, parked it, shut it off, and at that point you could say, well, thank you, Lord, I made it again. Because the P-40, as you notice and look here and look from this aircraft to the 51 over here, there's a difference in the width of the landing gear. And there is a difference in taxiing, and there's a difference in the landing, as you soon found out. So actually, I'd say of about 8 different fighters that have flew, different ones, the P-40 was the one that you said, I will stay awake, especially when I'm landing.
Did you fly it outside of Palm Springs, or did you transfer?
No, we just flew it.
Because I know these went to Russia also.
No, we never had. I never saw any of these go to the Russians. I think all of the 40s that ever went to Russia were on shipboard early. Some of these were in North Africa with the Allies, but
they were an early fighter.
Early fighters. As a matter of fact, they were being phased out, you might as well say, really.
Especially once the Mustangs with the big Myrlin engine came in. Yeah,
and the Republic P-47 came in.
Okay, this is a P-63 Bell Cobra?
King Cobra.
King Cobra.
Yeah.
And so you flew these quite frequently?
Well, they phased the 39 out in the fall of '44. And these came on board then, the P-63s, and they were an improvement over that one.
Tell us about the Russian star on the airplane.
Well, they all had the Russian star, and we used to kid about it, whether we were flying for the Texaco Air Force or the Russians, since Texaco Oil Company had a big red star at that time also. That's a P-39. And you see the bubble on the bottom, that's a 175-gallon gas tank, belly tank.
Did you have a favorite plane? These are P-38s here, obviously.
Well, actually, it's kind of a toss-up, really. The P-38, that one was an L. It was the last model of P-38s made, and that picture there is in southern Alaska. It was a dream aircraft. It was just a beautiful aircraft to fly. You could feather one engine and just keep on going.
So you really enjoyed that?
Oh, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But like the P-39, there's a lot of pilots, they didn't want anything to do with them. The P-39, it had some little no-nos. And if you didn't abide by those no-nos, it'd up and bite you. In other words, it could bury you, period, you know. But once you learned what you should and shouldn't do, why, it was a fun aircraft to fly, really. But there was lost a lot of pilots, really, because they just made one mistake, and quite often you only made one mistake. You just didn't let you try it again.
You had a friend that was killed and had to parachute out of one after a
Yeah.
landing. Would you share that with us, or?
Well, there again, we were in Great Falls, and one afternoon, and it was in probably late spring. We had lots of snow flurries blowing across the country and the like, and so we had these aircraft going north, and it was an A-20 and a flight of P-39s, and so they said, well, you boys, you want to flip to who gets which, and so we flipped, and I got the A-20, and so I'm on my own, and my good friend, he was a flight leader, and he had a P-39, and anyhow, we landed at Edmonton. That was usually our first base north, and I got caught in a storm, and took me a little while to get out of that, and time I got back in, about a half an hour behind time, while I looked operations, and up on the operation the board said such and such aircraft crashed, my friend was killed. And he had come in and landed, and the front nose gear was not fully extended. We have no idea why, but when he landed, and why he didn't notice that, but he touched, and of course the props were bent. He took it off, put power to it, and took it off, and tried to get some altitude, and he really didn't get enough. He bailed out, and when he bailed out, he evidently popped his chute, and the chute opened, and it caught in the tail section, and they were both buried in there. He probably should have on the landing. He should have just buried it right straight ahead once he was on the ground, and he would have, let's say, probably been all right, But you never know what you're going to do until the time happens, But
Did you feel that the P-30, this is a picture of you flying in Alaska over a mountain range.
That's over just off from Mount McKinley. We were headed from Fairbanks to Anchorage. This aircraft was going to a fighter outfit out on the chain, the Aleutian chain.
You made over 30 trips, is that right? Or you delivered over 30 airplanes?
I delivered at least 30-some aircraft up to in Alaska.
This is a great picture looking out over the P-38
Well, that's the
nose.
the nose on the right nacelle, the prop nacelle there. Just you sit in the middle of the two engines, and
that's what it looked like below you. Pretty desolate.
yeah, it was winter.
What temperatures did you work in here?
Well, wintertime we had lots of temperatures. 20s. The coldest we ever flew was out of Whitehorse one day, and we're flying P-39s, and the temperature was 54 below.
What did that feel like? How'd the airplanes fly at 54 below?
Well,
How
they
did you
had
fly
to.
that cold?
If they were outside, they kept big blast heaters blowing on the engines constantly to keep the oil and all, so it would circulate. But really, when it's 30 below, fortunately, usually it's deadly quiet when it was 30 to 40 and 50 below, and it really didn't make a heck of a lot of difference whether it was 30 below or 40 below. You didn't know the difference, and have no idea what, at 40 degrees, and with the wind chill, I can't even imagine what the temperature would have been. But
did you stay with the same group of men the whole time? Was there a camaraderie that formed there?
There was a constant turnover of pilots. We'll say some coming in and some going out. Some were going to over to China, India, and the like. But there was a number of us stayed together for probably 10 months, and we got so each one of us was a flight leader. So we were leading new pilots north.
This is a map that shows the route that you flew from Great Falls up to Fairbanks, and then, of course, from Fairbanks on into Russia, which you did not do.
That's the Russian. No, we didn't fly there.
Who took them at Fairbanks?
The Russian pilots, they came in across from the Bering Sea. They flew across to Nome and then down to Fairbanks. They came across on transports, usually C-47s and things like that.
Were they good pilots? Oh,
yes, I'm sure they were probably some of the best pilots you can imagine. They had a lot more experience than a great many American pilots, but they liked the P-39. It made quite a name for itself. Talking to my friend who spent time in Russia there, talking to Russian pilots, and surprisingly, the Russian pilots shot down a number of Germans over there in eastern Russia.
Using our Lend-Lease
yes.
airplanes, yeah.
Yeah.
A memorial was established in 19 what? When was this? This was established in Fairbanks for the 7th Ferry.
It was. I believe the day was August the 26th of 2006.
I'd like to read, if I may, what is printed at the memorial, at this statue, because it really does explain the purpose of this program, and it's the critical importance of it to our national security and to helping us win the war. It's called "We Flew in the Same Sky, the Alaskan-Siberian Airway, 1942 to 1945." This monument commemorates the flights of American planes from the continental United States via Alaska to Siberia, as authorized by the Lend-Lease Act of 1941, an act to promote the defense of the United States. Between 1942 and 1945, pilots flew the Alaskan-Siberian Lend-Lease Airway to deliver nearly 8,000 warbirds halfway around the world, traversing more than 12 time zones from Great Falls, Montana to the Russian war fronts. Much of the route lay over remote and roadless wilderness where pilots made their way in stages from the safety of one hastily built airfield to the next. Alaska was the exchange location. United States Army Air Corps pilots from the 7th Ferrying Squadron flew planes from their points of manufacture in the United States to Great Falls, then across Canada to Ladd Field near Fairbanks, Alaska, now Fort Wainwright. From there, pilots of the USSR Air Force flew the planes over western Alaska and across Siberia to the war fronts. Due to the severe weather conditions and mechanical problems, 133 airplanes crashed in North America and 44 in Siberia along the Alaskan-Siberia Airway. The heroism of American and Soviet pilots who flew these warplanes from the United States to the Soviet Union during World War II and all who participated in this endeavor will always be remembered. And here is, they have here the U.S. Air Force Air Transport Command, which you were a part of. The Women Air Force Service Pilots, the WASPs.
Right.
The U.S. Air Force 7th Ferrying Squadron, which you were a part of.
Right.
And the USSR Air Force. The WASPs. Did you meet any of the WASPs, the women pilots of World War II that so few people even today are aware of?
It was almost like passing in the dark. We never had any in the north, you know.
They were at Great Falls. And
They would some delivered into Great Falls, yes.
Yeah. So, did you feel a part of a team like they just described? Did you feel that the camaraderie with the Russian pilots and know that you were all doing, you know, the endeavor was the same to get these planes?
Well, you're off the. We're not on the air, are we?
Yes.
Well, that's great. Yes, there was. You know, all pilots have a certain camaraderie. You know. We, of course, neither one of us being able to, let's say, converse with the other than about sign language, why there wasn't a great deal of camaraderie that transpired. But they were good pilots, that's for sure. And a great many of their pilots had come off the Eastern Front that had been given a break. Instead of fighting the Germans, why they gave them a break of flying some aircraft from Fairbanks across, you know. So it was kind of a interlude for them, intermission, we'll say, and for some of the Russian pilots.
And no one stayed at Fort Ladd very long, did they?
Oh no, I mean sometimes
This is Fort Ladd. Yeah.
we'd deliver one in the afternoon or whenever, and we were on a transport. We were on a transport back down to Great Falls. We'd sleep in a sleeping bag all the way back, depending upon whether how many stops we had to make or like, you know. But no, and then about all you'd do is I'd pick up my laundry and what mail there was, and by then they said, well, we have another aircraft for you here tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow morning or when, and back to it you went.
So tell us about when you left the 7th Ferry Squadron and went on into China Burma Theater, and why?
Well, let's see, in January, we knew the handwriting was on the wall that we were going to be sent to India and China Burma Theater, because a number of our friends, others had been rotated to there, and that was where the war was. A lot of, let's say, activity was going on over there as far as the Air Transport Command. And so in February, early February, they sent us down to Homestead Field right on the tip of Florida, close to the Keys, and trained and ground schooled and learned to fly C-54 transports, the Douglas 4-engine transports, and B-24s. They were using some 24s. They were putting big fuel tanks into them, and they were called C-87s. They were still B-24 bombers, but they had gasoline, and famous last words, who's got a match? But anyhow, we trained there and checked out, and I was a co-pilot, learned how to fly one, you know, on and off. But so then the orders came through to I was going to go to China.
Was this in 1945?
Early
1945?
Yeah, this is in March. No, it was April. Let's see, April. Latter part of April, time we got through with that. We went. So they. To get us over there, why, I was a crew of another pilot and I. We had a brand new Martin B-26 Marauder, and it was the last model of the B-26 that was made, and we'd brought one back out of England before the invasion of Europe across the South Atlantic, of the early model, which was called a clip wing, and it was a high performance and high wing loaded and had a few no-nos, and a lot of pilots didn't want anything to do with them. But there again, once you learned about it, we'd been flying A-20, so it wasn't too big a deal, and we loved the aircraft. And but this was a brand new 26 to be delivered to the French Air Force in Saint-Nazaire, which is south. Oh no, it's east of Paris, I think, probably around 60 miles or so. And so anyhow, we took this B-26 to South America, Natal, and hopped across to Ascension Island, little island off quite a ways out in the middle of the South Atlantic, and then to Liberia and up the coast of Africa to Morocco. And
were you by yourself? Did you fly alone? We
flew alone. Just the crew of us did. You know, we had pilot, co-pilot, navigator, radio operator, and engineer. And at that time, we didn't have the goodies such as GPS and a few more things. It was a navigator. You did need a navigator and hope that he was able to read his stars and what have you.
But no other aircraft went with you?
No other aircraft went with. No, you had a lot of ocean out there to yourself. But we delivered it up to the French. Had the French markings delivered to the French. We delivered it on December the 15th of 1945, which happened to be my birthday. And 1 year to the day, in May the 15th of 1944, I was on a train and went through London up to Scotland to pick up an aircraft to fly back. So 1 year to the day, to get from the French air base to Paris, all we could get on was a little French train, was hauling prisoners of war of our boys that were just been released, going into Paris. So I thought, this is different. 1 year to the day, I'm on a train going into Paris. So that was kind of a coincidence that I had nothing to do with. But
did you talk to any of the prisoners of war?
Oh yes, there was some American boys. They were airmen.
Coming out of where? Where had they been held?
I don't recall the which prisoner, but the Germans they put the Allied or the American airmen in a prison, by themselves. They didn't mix up all the different prisoners, They put the airmen in a prison by themselves, One of the treasures this one sergeant had, he'd made up a little crystal set type of radio in a cigar box like deal. And that was his treasure of being able to listen to the Allied, radio. But from that, then we left out of there and we went then down to Cairo and crossed the Red to Abadan, which is what Iran today and all that.
Were you flying airplanes at this point?
We're in a C-54. And from there to Karachi, which is Pakistan today, which is right close to where all the problems are.
Were you delivering aircrafts?
No, at that time we were just riding. We went on up to, northern India, close to Nepal, as upper Assam. Then our orders said to go to Kunming in South China, Yunnan province. And that's about as far as you could go south into China.
Why were you going there?
Well, that was the hub of all of our operations, so to speak. Supplies and this and that usually flew across the hump and were delivered and dispersed from there to whether they went south or whether they went north towards the Great Wall or, Chongqing and towards the Great Wall. So I went over, was sent there, and still fully expecting to fly 4-engine. Well, you never know the powers to be and what the gears that grind in the military. And lo and behold, why, they had enough 4-engine pilots, and they sent us to northern Burma, a village called Myitkyina. And Myitkyina had been one of the last big battles. It was the decisive and a major battle in that part of Burma, the Japanese and all. And it had been cleared out, a few months before. And then I was based there for the remaining of the war period after the war. And then we'd fly out of...
Were you there when the atom bomb was dropped?
Oh, yes.
And tell us about that, when that happened.
Well, we were flying supplies. And sometimes we'd go to down to Calcutta or other parts of India, but a big part of the time we were flying across the lower part of the hump to Kunming, China. And we were hearing stories about, things, maybe the war was, winding down a bit and the like, And I believe it was August the 17th, either 14th or 17th, I had the set of orders. And the set of orders, it says you are on 15 days extended duty for the purpose of hauling horses and mules to the Chinese in South China next to the Indo-China border. We had been flying horses and mules along with soldiers and all the supplies, But anyhow, we had just taken out in the afternoon and just climbed out of our base there in Myitkyina, and all of a sudden, ACAC was going off, pow, 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 here and there and everywhere, and we said, whoa, what in the world is transpiring, And right about then, when the tower boys, he said, the war is over, the war is ended. And we were in the air headed to China. So... What
did that feel like to hear those words?
Well... It was a good feeling, we said, well, they don't need us back here, and they told us to go on. So we went on over to China and continued to do quite a bit of flying over there.
This is up here is a silk silk bailout flag, excuse me, map, a silk bailout map that you carried with you.
We had this with our parachute.
Uh-huh.
And some emergency.
Why did you carry this, and what are all the letters on the side?
Well, there's about 4 or 5 or so different languages and of the different dialects in India, and then there's some even native dialects. So probably in Burma, like there was Nagas and Shans and native tribes, and then there's another one of Chinese.
May I read it in English? It says,
it'd be far better than trying to do it otherwise.
It says, I am an American airman. My airplane is destroyed. I cannot speak your language. I am an enemy of the Japanese. Please give me food and take me to the nearest Allied military post. You will be rewarded. And so you carried these not only to know where you were, but also to help save your life if you had to go down in any of the territory and came across Native people then.
Right, you bet.
Okay. Yeah.
There were those that did. There was a number of them that did go down, and this is what helped them.
Flying the hump, what that was like. I mean, pretty different from flying from Great Falls to Alaska. Was it very similar to it? What was it like?
Well, we were based in northern Burma, right in the midst. It was all jungle country, quite hot, humid, and then we got into the monsoon seasons, to where it just rains in torrential rains. And in our flying, we flew around the clock as far as that goes. Day and night, you flew. The only thing that keep you down if the weather was just kept you right on the ground. We'd quite often you'd take off, and after you got, let's say, like 500 to 1,000 feet, most you were in the soup, so to speak, and then you spent several hours strictly on instruments until you got over into China, which was usually Kunming, and sometimes there'd be 6 or 8 or so planes stacked up on top of one another, so to speak, waiting to work their way down to land. In other words, you'd be 1,000 feet apart and fly out a ways and come back, and then one plane would land, and you'd drop down 1,000 feet, and it was just a kind of a staircase deal of landing you, but you'd break out maybe then at hopefully 1,000 feet. But weather was the biggest thing.
Did you fly over the Amazon jungle at all?
Well, yeah, going different times. We did. You'd go fly over the Amazon, and we landed at Belém, which was on the river there.
Anybody you know ever go down in the Amazon?
Oh my! Not that I know of. We lost an engine on that B-26 coming back from England on that first trip over the mouth of the Amazon, and the stories, well, boy, you just sure don't want to lose an engine or this or that. You're going to be in big trouble, and so we were cruising along, and they headed north, and all of a sudden the right engine turned rather quiet as it stopped, and you run around the cockpit and feathered the prop and this and that and throttled forward and so forth, and finally say, well, gosh, looks like we're not losing any altitude, are we? Looks like maybe we ought to be able to keep on okay, since you're trying to say, well, which is the next 400 miles to the next spot if there's a landing. But what had happened was we had big belly tanks in the bomb bay to carry extra fuel, and it had a transfer pump that had kicked out when it was transferring fuel up to the wing tank on the right. And the gauges weren't working quite right on that aircraft, on those, and it would just run it out of fuel. So our crew chief, he went back and he was dinking around checking this and that, and he found out that that's what had happened. Got the transfer pump going and pumped fuel into the right engine and started up our windmill, and we continued happily on home. But we had thought about the possibilities of the Amazon country, but
pretty treacherous area.
Well, it was a joke. In 1 month's time, we'd been from the Alaskan theater of where it was ice and snow and all, down through the Amazon and across Africa and England. Then we came back, and at that time the Air Force hadn't really gone into survival training like they have today, and so we had a brief bit. And they gave you a May West, and let's see, there was like a 4-man life raft in the bomber deal. But first off, when you went over the Amazon, you know, you said, "My God, look at that! Nothing but jungles and jungle trees. Boy, I certainly don't want to go down there." So after you got from that, you hopped across the South Atlantic, and for hours and like, as far as the eye could see, was water everywhere, and not a drop to drink. And you say, "God, if I'm going, oh my God, if I go down there and we're in this life raft, it's going to be a lonely spot." So you survived that, and then you went up across North Africa, across the part of the Sahara Desert, and we were up at, I think it was 10,000 that day, and the dust was clear up there and the like, and you said, "God, nothing but sand and barren and this and that. Oh Lord, if I go down, no water to drink, you know." So we made all that. So within a month's time, we went from the freezing to death in the Arctic to the Amazon jungle and the Sahara Desert and the South Atlantic with water everywhere. And fortunately, we didn't have to enjoy or do any of those things, you know. But you do think about it, but you don't dwell on it. It always happens to somebody else, you know. You can't dwell on those things, especially when you're flying mountains and you're in a single-engine fighter and this and that and a few things. And if you thought about, well, gee, there's no place to land. What am I going to do? And there's no search and rescue like we have, you know. So, but you can't fly that way. It happens to somebody else.
So when it was time for you to come home, where were you when you got this the word that you were coming back to the United States?
Well, we finished
and what
up.
year was it?
That was in 45. We finished flying a lot of things over there into China and around India, and flying personnel to some of the bases. They were starting to return home, and we sweated out how we were going to come back, and lo and behold, we were lucky, and in, let's see, a very early December, we were in Dhaka, which big city on the Ganges River, east of Calcutta there, and we got orders to fly home on a C-54 and was part of a crew of the C-54. So here we are. We flew home on a C-54 Douglas Air Transport. It was a great aircraft, and flew across from India to Karachi, and then across to Cairo, and from Cairo to Casablanca, Marrakech, and the Azores off of Africa, and then to Bermuda. And then to Florida.
Back to the United States.
Back to the United States.
And did you stay in the military, or did you choose to leave the military? Well,
all my letters, and like the whole time, all I could think about was, even at 18,000, I'm reading a livestock magazine or something, and I didn't have. And George was doing the flying; he's the autopilot sometimes, you know, and all I was thinking about is getting back to a ranch and the like. So being a one-track mind. And I had a chance to fly for Delta because they were going to start building up. And some of us that had trained with them, they said, "Well, we want you to come back and become pilots because we're going to expand." And I checked in and talked about it a little bit and went on home. And in the middle of, I think it was about June of 46, I got my discharged and all the papers out of Marchfield in California, and I am back to a civilian, and my folks had sold that ranch, and we were then starting to look for another ranch, cattle ranch. And then from then on, where did you find the ranch? Well, the first ranch we bought was up out of Merced, California, in the San Joaquin Valley, which is just west of about, the crow flies, probably about 60 miles, the foothills of Yosemite country. And we had a real good ranch and enjoyed every bit of it. Had my family,
did you
2
marry?
boys. No, I got married then. I got married when I was 30 and the like. And
what is your wife's name?
My wife, she was teaching school. I'd met her before the war, and she was a wet-nosed little girl, which you didn't pay any attention to at that time. And after the war, why, one thing to another, her folks and my folks, they knew one another and knew cattle and like, and of course you know how it is. One thing led to another, and so it's just been one happy merry-go-round from then on. We have two great sons, just terrific, and families, and I've had a most fortunate life. Have no complaints.
Steve, you had so many different experiences in your military career. I mean, just vastly different experiences for all those years that you were in the military. Was there any one particular experience that stands out more in your mind than another, or does it all just, have the same impact in terms of your memory?
Well, it was rather confusing in why things come about and why things happen. And quite a number of times, you'd get a set of orders and you'd say, oh gosh, why do I have to do that? And then it turned out to be couldn't have been better, or you were so lucky to have, it was the luck of the draw. And I mean, it's several different times it was just the luck of the draw because it happened to the other person, it didn't happen to me, and I just missed it by flip of the coin or this or that, you can't understand why. There was different little things happen, with each aircraft or this or that, and
How many different airplanes did you fly?
Oh, I believe I flew 21 different military aircraft. The smallest was an L2A, which had a huge horsepower of about 65 horse, I believe, and it was I'd had a set of orders to go to Ogden, Utah, and pick up an A-25, the Curtiss Helldiver bomber, big Curtiss Navy diving bomber, and the Army Air Force, they didn't have any of those. They all had gone to the Navy or Marines, and I understood that they had given them the Army about maybe 30 or so, and I never found out why. But anyhow, they had this 125 that had work done at Ogden at the base, and none of us had ever even seen one or flown one or knew anything about it. So, like I say, all aircraft, two wheels, let's see, an engine, throttle, and all. So, so it was kind of an experience. The first takeoff on that, But all things turn out, and wasn't anything seriously happened but
so you were very happy then to be back on the farm, so to speak, to be back
that's all I wanted.
Yeah. Did you continue to fly?
I left. I flew a little bit after the war, just for the lark of it, occasionally. And then my family, growing and get involved, and it wasn't until we moved to Oregon in 65, I guess. We moved up to Eastern Oregon, bought a ranch up there, my wife and I, and I've been up there for a few years, and I don't know, the bug bit me again on flying, and so the Cessna dealer there, he had I think a 172 and all, and he was gung-ho, and you could rent a plane didn't cost very much, so I started flying, checked out in that and flying around a little bit, and then said, oh heck, maybe I ought to buy one, So when we got through with that, we'd bought 4 different aircraft. The last one we'd had a couple of Piper Arrows, which is a nice little 4-place retract, and we really enjoyed flying. We flew throughout the West, and we flew down to Mexico, down to past Guaymas to south of there quite a ways. And
Cabo San Lucas?
No, we went Los Mochis. Los Mochis is where and friends there with the group flew down. But anyhow, we flew around for a number of years. And
so you have 2 sons?
I have 2 sons.
Do you have grandchildren?
I have 4 grandsons. Well, it's 4 grandsons and 2 granddaughters. And now we have 2 great-great-granddaughters and 1 great-great-grandson.
Well, you have a huge family, and I'd like to know, before we end this incredible interview, you had such a vast array of experiences during those years of World War II, and what you did contributed so much to our country's safety, to the health of our country, because it helped us win that war. During all of those years, if you reflect back on those now, how do you think that those years helped to form you to become the father, the grandfather, and the great-grandfather that you are today? What lessons do you think you carried forward with you that you'd like to leave for your family to know?
Well, I guess to start, determination to accomplish something, and that was my determination when I got fired up there early in the war to become a pilot. And then during my flying time, I did a great deal of flying on your own. And when you fly on your own, why, there's nobody sitting alongside of you that says, well, I'll take it, or I can handle it, or help you out. You are it. Your navigation and getting up and getting down, good weather, bad weather. And so you learn to, let's say, take care of yourself, depend on yourself, and go ahead. I enjoyed my flying. If I'd have been smart at all, I'd probably have flown with Delta, the airlines, and I'd have made enough money to have bought a cattle ranch free and clear and retired with a nice pension and sat back. But as it is, we did it the hard way and thoroughly enjoyed it. Spent a lot of time horseback, still enjoy it and all. And I have no regrets, really. Never really, let's say, made a real fortune or like, but there was so many good things in life that took care of a lot of that. So I have no complaints whatsoever. I was so fortunate. In all the war years, I was so fortunate, and especially to be able to fly like we did. And when you think of all the boys that had no choice whatsoever as to what to do, they were just sent forward. They lived in the mud, this and that. And I don't know, we didn't think of it, we were fortunate.
Well, I want to just thank you so much for coming to the Warhawk Air Museum and allowing us this honor of preserving your military history. It truly, truly is an honor, and I also want to thank you for being an American veteran and being such a huge part of creating a country like we have today, this great America that we all live in. It is what it is today because of men like you, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being an American veteran.
Well, thank you. It's been most enjoyable visiting.